up on, you go up 231 and you take a Sand Hill up there on
Where the school is up there?
no, you're talking about up in Bozeman. This is on 231. Go up and where the old landfill used to be. Turn. In fact, those fields are built on the landfill property.
You all ready?
Yeah.
You want to see the indication of that? If you would please stand with me as we say the pledge and have invocation before we start the meeting. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father, Lord, we thank you for this day and all your many blessings. We thank you for each one who's here tonight. And we ask now as we conduct your business that you would help us, Lord, to do it in a manner that's favorable to you and favorable to the citizens of Walton County. We ask you just lead and guide and direct us in all that we do. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Matt, do you have any announcements?
Yes, sir. We do have one very important announcement. We have promoted Kristen Shell to planning manager effective today. We're very proud of that.
Congratulations, I think.
We'll strive. Thank you for probation.
That would be our only announcement.
Okay. Well, we're ready to move on.
Okay. This is the first Planning Commission public hearing for the first four elements of the Matrix project to reconcile and update our comprehensive plan and land development code. These are the first four elements of the comprehensive plan. Kristen has been tasked with being the project manager on this project, so I'm going to turn it over to her and let her introduce.
Very good. Just real quick before Kristen gets started, if you haven't already done so, please silence your phones or turn them off. That way we minimize interruptions. And I'll say it just in case. However, I think there will be no need to even say this, but we will have a 9 o'clock time certain at the end of the meeting. Hopefully it'll be much earlier.
Good evening. This is, like Max said, this is our first part of the comprehensive plan. There's going to be 3 different parts, and this is your first crack at the first 4 elements. Once we get through the comp plan, we'll move on to land development code later. So we're shooting for September, October time frame to be done with the comp plan portion. Matrix, unfortunately, was not in their scope to be at all of our public meetings. So that is why you're stuck with me, but they did play an integral role in the drafting of these elements that you have here, and we've been working closely with them. Tonight, what we would really like to do is get to a consensus opinion on the issues that I explained to you, and that will be the recommendation to the county commission on these elements. So we'll listen to the alternatives that are out there surrounding each of the issues, let you discuss and listen to the public and decide, and then hopefully get to that point of making a recommendation. So there are a couple of changes that are common to all of the elements, and I'm not going to go through each of these for each of the elements because, we really wanted to establish a comprehensive plan as a policy document, and we're trying to get a true planning hierarchy, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So that means our land development code will ultimately be the regulatory tool that implements that policy. And you want your comprehensive plan policy to be really clear. You don't want to have objectives with multiple objectives in there or multiple concepts. You want to have very clear direction given in the comprehensive plan. So every opportunity we've had, we want to have, if it says the same thing in 2 or 3 places, we want it to only say that in 1 place. That cuts down on the risk of error and it helps us with implementation. We want to have that clear goal, objective, and policy hierarchy, really where you have a goal as a general statement. Your objective is a specific measurable target, and it's just one target. We have lots of places in our comprehensive plan where we have goal objectives that are a paragraph or longer. And that makes it really hard to understand just what you're trying to do. Policies are operational actions. Those are things that we actually do, not things that we don't do or pie in the sky or anything like that, or things that we've actually budgeted and staffed and we do towards reaching those objectives. So you see changes that are related to making that happen. And we also had some statute and code changes, so you'll see some of that in there too. And underneath each change, there's a staff comment that says, okay, this is why we did it, or if it got moved, this is where it got moved to specifically. So it's very transparent. Back to that planning hierarchy. This is a real important concept in urban planning theory, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but we, as practitioners, really need to have this hierarchy to make our jobs easy. We need to have this so that everybody that picks up our regulatory code and our visionary comp plan can tell exactly what it is they're supposed to be doing when they have a development project in front of them. And your level of specificity kind of goes up as you move up. So you have your comp plan with your broad policy, your code, that's where your regulations are. And if I want to say, well, why am I doing this regulation? Or what is the point of this? I should be able to look back at the comp plan policy and see, oh yeah, that was what this community wanted. This is what we're trying to do. And ultimately, I should be able to look back at that supporting documentation and see, oh, this was the real problem they were trying to address. Was it water quality? Was it compatibility? What was it that they were trying to get to? Okay, first element is conservation. Probably the hardest issue that we got to talk about tonight right here. So we're going to do it first while everybody's fresh and still with me. Because I have confused myself on this one. I'll just go ahead and tell you that. I have been around and around. We have both with our wetland policies what's an internal inconsistency, meaning that the comp plan was inconsistent with itself. So one policy said one thing, later on another policy said another thing, internally inconsistent. And that is the hardest type of inconsistency for staff, as opposed to inconsistent with the land development code, because staff always goes with the comp plan when those two documents are inconsistent. But what do you do when the comp plan is inconsistent inside itself? So we had both of those types of inconsistencies with our wetland regulations. So we have three scenarios. And this chart is not what is in your draft. I'm going to tell you what is in your draft now, but let me set up the scenarios for you before we get into that. Scenario one really is where you have wetlands and uplands on your development site, and you do not impact those wetlands at all. This is easy. In that case, you can transfer your entire density or intensity into your upland portions. So there's no penalty in that case because you're not impacting the wetlands. You're preserving them on your site. That one is easy. The hard one is where you have all wetlands, or let's say 90% all wetlands. We had an internal inconsistency here where it said no commercial development would be allowed in these situations, and then later on down it said you have the entitlement associated with your underlying land use category, which if that's commercial, it's that you could do an office or you could do whatever. Now we do have a penalty that says your ISR is 0.10, or your density, let's say if you're a residential piece and you're almost all wetlands or all wetlands, your density is 1 unit per 20 acres. So the current draft that you have now is to leave those penalties, but defer them to the land development code, and to remove that sentence that talks about the 1 per 20 and the no commercial development. So what it basically says is that you will have a density and intensity penalty. Doesn't say what that is. That would be deferred to the code. And it removes that outright prohibition for commercial, because in practice, that's not what we've been doing. That's kind of a compromise position, I think, between what we currently have, where you're automatically penalized to 1 per 20. Let's say I've got a 10-acre tract, I get one house, or almost nothing. So we're getting close into the not quite a taking, but we're getting really close there.
So you're saying in the comp plan, there'll be no penalty addressed, it'll just be stated that there's a penalty.
There is a
You'll
penalty.
And you'll leave the addressing of the penalty to the land developer.
Right, so that would provide the opportunity for administrative relief, but it would still allow us to establish that penalty. And it may be the 1 per 20 or the 0.10 or whatever we decide that it should be. And you can weigh in on that tonight if you like, or not. And well, in the third scenario really hasn't changed from what it always was, and that is if you have wetlands and uplands, and you have enough uplands basically to accomplish your project, but you choose to fill wetlands, then you're penalized. There is a disincentive to do that, because in those filled wetlands, you only have the 1 per 20 and the 0.10 ISR, and that is how it's always been. That really hasn't changed.
You got a question. You said that you can fill in the wetlands and then be penalized. But how much of the wetland can they fill in? Do y'all have a scale, or they just fill it all in and y'all assess them?
Yes, essentially. If you get permitted, I mean, you still have to do your mitigation and go through the state and federal regulating agencies. So there's that disincentive that's inherent in the process, really. I mean, that process is really separate from the county's disincentive program.
So, but you don't have any handle on what the fee would be, though. Y'all just say you would be assessed.
No fee, not a
No, I'm
fee.
talking about if they fill in the wetland, you said they would have some type of violation and they'd be charged for it. Did I understand that right?
No.
Okay, I misunderstood you then. Okay.
Yes. No, the penalty really is in a density or intensity reduction. Right now, it's your normal impervious surface area ratio that you can have on a commercial site usually is 0.85. So 85% of your site can be impervious or developed. If you fill wetlands, that's reduced to 0.10 to 10%. So that is the penalty that we currently have.
So if you fill in wetlands, after you fill the wetlands in, you're assessed a penalty.
That's right.
And the penalty is instead of developing 85% of the lot, you only develop 10% of the lot.
Yes, maybe penalty is a bad
That's
word. It's a disincentive. Maybe that's a better
substantial
word.
penalty.
Yes, it is. And it really is hard for people that have all wetlands. You know, in other words, I don't have anything to work with where I can transfer to an upland portion of my site. I don't have any of that. So, you know, deferring that to the code would be sort of a compromise from what we have now, really, because it would provide some option for, you know, let's say they got to put a road somewhere and, you know, or develop on a portion of their site that makes sense community-wise, but they can't do it because they've got that penalty. So you would have some flexibility with moving that to the code.
The some contractors, I know when they do developing, if they take in some wetland, they can mitigate with some other land they own somewhere else. Would that still apply too?
Yes, they have to do that no matter what, because that is a state and federal requirement. That is not really what we're talking about. So on top of all this, they have to do that.
They have to do that also.
Right.
So on top of what the regulations and everything that the county put in place.
Yes, the county has an additional disincentive, basically.
So instead of, if you got a 100-acre plot, that's 85 acres normally you could develop. If you fill in wetlands, that's 10 acres.
For residential, it's a little bit different. It's a 1 per 20 is your disincentive. So let's say if I've got 10 acres and I fill 9 of those acres, basically I'm getting like a half a unit.
Wow.
The penalty only applies for the wetland portion of the project.
Yes, and if you have
So whatever-
uplands, you have that density that's associated. Let's say if I've got a 40-acre tract and 20 acres is uplands and 20 acres is wetlands. If I don't touch that 20 acres of wetlands, I could put my whole 40 acres worth of density, let's say it's 2 units per acre, I could put that whole 80 units on my 20 acres. If I fill those 20, I get 1 house out of that, plus the 40 I had for my uplands, so I got 41 units on my uplands.
If a developer has to put a road through a wetlands, same penalty.
There's some break for infrastructure.
So it's not identical to fill it in for a house.
Well, I know on projects we have, if they've got like a crossing or something, usually if you're doing that though, it's such a small amount of your site that it really doesn't make a difference. But what you're thinking, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, it's not as bad as it seems, but if you, let's say, I got a commercial piece, or I got a residential piece, and I want to have like a town center, or I want to have some multifamily, and I want to put that in a certain place, you don't have really any flexibility with that penalty being in the code. So, I mean, in the comp plan.
But in the code, you could have some flexibility with that.
Yes, they could come forward for variance if there's some unique or overriding unique situation, but they would still, it still says in the comp plan that there's some penalty, and maybe when you get to the code, you decide what that is. I don't know. There's other options that we could talk about, or we can hold it right here. So I'm gonna let you
I got
guys.
one more question, I won't bother you anymore, but now, I understand what you're talking about too, when you fill in, you only get a ratio of 1. What about if they use it for fill in for common area, like little park areas and stuff like that, would that still apply?
Yes.
So if they took and had the residential units on 20 acres, 40 units, then they come in, they build another 10 acres, they can use that for the common area, but they still get their 40 units over here. Like a little park or a walk area, like a common area, walk area,
You would still get your density that was
but you can
associated
use
with what
any way
you
want to.
didn't
You
fill.
don't have to build a house on it when you fill it in. That's what I'm asking.
Right, no,
Yeah,
you
they-
don't.
So they
I
can fill it
mean,
in, use it for multi-purpose.
They
Common
could,
area or anything like that?
they could. But usually, if you were gonna go through that heartache of mitigation and permitting with the state and federal agencies, you would think you would wanna get some kind of monetary value out of going
You
through
only
that.
get one lot, they need much value.
Right,
Yeah, so
yeah.
I would think, a lot of developers like to have common area for the residents to gather or meet or walk or play, take the kids. And that's why I wanted, so they could fill in the wetlands, use that for common area, even though they get penalized, it's still
Yep,
fine.
they could put whatever they wanted,
Okay.
absolutely.
Doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose if you allow all the development on half the plot?
No, I mean, I think that's a tremendous incentive not to fill, because you're
It is
getting.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that works. It's worked really well for Walton, honestly. Most of the projects that we get, they don't fill wetlands. They leave them alone, and they cluster their density on the upland portions, and that sometimes results in smaller lot sizes. Especially when you take in consideration that, plus the preservation requirements, which are not wetlands. Scrub is not in a wetland. So this is additional land area that they put aside. So then they're taking all of that density from these environmental areas, and they're putting them in the least environmentally sensitive portion of property.
Which is smart.
Yeah, I think it's smart too.
Yeah, you don't want, you want to distance, you don't want people filling their wetlands unless they have to.
Yeah, you want to discourage that as much as possible.
It's floodplain. It's a trade-off. Almost everything in land development really is a trade-off. That does give them some viable density on their upland, because and I think it's fair. You're transferring your entire what you have entitled if you don't fill those wetlands. If you fill the wetlands, then there's a disincentive currently.
So I do agree with leaving the penalties in the code, not putting them in the comp plan. I think that's.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, in response to Commissioner Glidewell's questioning, we try to have policies that protect private property rights at every opportunity. And that's a balance between protecting private property rights and protecting environmentally sensitive lands that are important to the public, and our economy and the ecology of our area. But it's a delicate balancing act. So when we have a policy that allows you to transfer your density out of the environmentally sensitive areas to the upland areas, that in itself is protecting private property rights, because we're not penalizing someone for what their entitlement is based on their size of property. We're just encouraging them to take that development opportunity and put it in the best spot on their land. So that's really what the basis is behind the transfer of density, try to protect private property rights.
If I own, do these restrictions, I guess, go by plot, by the property appraisers? Because say I own 60 acres that are connected, but there's 3 different parcels on the property appraisers list, and one of those is wet and one of them isn't. Can I combine all those so I can get the most bang for my buck out of the 60?
That's typically what people do.
That's what I was getting
They
at.
assemble parcels, and then they cluster the density out of those parcels where they've got adequate uplands to build whatever they're
So
wanting to.
y'all are not
cluster
slaves
on.
to the property appraiser's parcel lines, in other words?
No, the property appraiser assigns parcels based on the taxpayer's choice. If you've got more than one parcel, you can, as you well know, you can have all of your property and maybe 100 parcels, but you can have it all combined into one parcel ID for convenience of billing. But when we look at a development site, it may involve multiple parcels as identified by the property appraiser, all assembled into one development site. And then when an applicant brings that development site to us, it's that collection of parcels that we look at to apply these policies. And there is some strategy as to how to assemble your development site.
I'm sure there is.
Yes, Matt, you might answer this question for me. And I hear it all the time down here in the south end, people who get out this land. Then how do they assess, a lot of complaints I hear from people all the time, and developers and everything in general. The comprehensive plan y'all doing, I think, is really great, very commendable. I like the way you're doing it, but their question to me is, why, if we put our density up here, how are they going to assess our taxes on the wetland if we can't develop? But would that be a question y'all can answer, or do y'all work hand in hand with the tax collector on that?
Well, we don't get involved in
The tax.
determining what the value of land is. That's in the purview of the property appraiser. We certainly work with the property appraiser to answer questions about use of land, but they actually send people out from the property appraiser's office to look at the use of your land, and that's what it's supposed to
Well,
be taxed on.
this question in reference to a subdivision or a community being built and using the density like you just described. And the people got 10 acres of wetland they're not going to touch, they don't want to be assessed higher taxes on it like they would the land they are developing. And that's the questions I get sometimes. I didn't know if y'all work hand in hand with the tax appraiser or not, or do y'all send the information to them and let them know that this has been set aside as wetland, it will never be developed, cannot be developed, so the value is a zero value.
We do share future land use map information with them, which tells them what the development potential is in the future. It doesn't answer all the questions, because if it's 100% wet, then you got a little less than what the future
Right.
land use map might suggest.
That's sort of what because when you're combining, you're taking all the value from that wetlands parcel, the density, and you're transferring it over here, and that leaves a parcel that.
You didn't take the value, what they do is they let you optimize the density of the
Right.
land that's being used. But they don't, the
And in that-
wetland that can't be used, you don't be assessed the same amount of tax.
In your theory, the value of what could be developed in those wetlands, if it has to be developed in the wetlands, will never be created. But if
Right.
we can transfer that future
To
value to
somewhere
the
else.
upland, then that parcel gets the maximum property value, both for the owner of the property and for the public when it comes to property taxes. So,
But what he's saying is the wetlands itself is left with
It don't have, it got a zero.
zero value, and
It's
oftentimes
typically including conservation easement.
the assessment is still pretty substantial.
They should go talk to, that would be, you know, if you record something in conservation easement, then you would take that document, that's on the property owner, and I'm sure if most of them would do that. if
Well,
they're-
I'm all new to this, and I don't mean to take up a whole lot of time, just people ask me this, and I like to be able to respond to them, how y'all address it with the tax collector, now I can tell them, thank you.
one of the things that we typically encounter, if you look at your property card from the property appraiser, got a land use field there. What that is the Department of Revenue code for the existing use of that property, whatever that is. You're using it for a landfill, or your farming, or whatever you're doing. That is the use that they assess taxes against. Let's say you've got a village mixed-use piece, which is one of our more intense land use categories, except that it's on the planted pines, and you register to farm there, you're gonna take 10% of whatever the property appraiser thinks that's gonna,
You assess that.
the value would be based on the current use.
That don't have anything to do with what we're talking about
When you
tonight,
start to
right?
actually develop it, the property appraiser starts picking up, what you're really doing.
So what Frank needs to tell them is they need to go see the property appraiser and get the value adjusted. or the
And those
use
values aren't
adjusted.
determined by what the planning department does.
Let's move on with what we're here for.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's okay. Do you want to, I have each element, it's broken down, there's a couple issues that we've got to make decisions about. Do you want to take public comment on each issue or each element, or how would you like to handle
Let's
that?
do it on each element separately.
Okay, all right, so, there's some other options on wetland scenarios. If you're satisfied with the discussion we've had so far, I will skip that.
Yes.
One thing to mention is the wetland buffer. This is a substantive change that did get moved to the land development code, the 25-foot buffer, and this is a really good example of why we did that. You can see that the back of the property is in conservation easement. They have a road going in that is uplands, but the buffer would totally occlude that. So they couldn't use their uplands to access the back uplands of the portion. They would have to actually fill wetlands to get to the back of the property. And this is in conflict with what the state and the Army Corps want us to do, really, because they would like for you to avoid your wetlands if at all possible. So we wanted to have some administrative relief because this is very parcel specific, you know, and we don't want to actually be causing people to fill wetlands when they have uplands they can use because of that buffer.
Okay.
And in Kristen's example here, this is an example of where our secondary wetland protection zone, our 25-foot wetland buffer, that we have to apply because the comp plan says we have to in every circumstance, would completely cover up what could be used as the driveway. And the only way to make that wetland buffer go away so they can use what would be the driveway is to get a wetland fill permit and fill a little bit on either side to make the buffer go away. And our policy has the effect of requiring them to go get a state or federal permit to fill wetlands that otherwise wouldn't have to be filled because they've got enough room to get to their uplands. This would be a circumstance where they could go to the Board of Adjustment, apply for a variance to get relief from that 25-foot wetland buffer. And then the intent of what we're trying to do is actually carried out.
Right.
The
That makes
Corps,
sense.
they don't want to give them a permit, so this is like an inconsistency with state and federal
Right.
laws, yeah. Okay, all right, tree preservation. We have two places in our comprehensive plan, one is in conservation element and one is in the recreation and open space element that says the county will, regulate or protect heritage or landmark trees. And it's not defined what those are, but if we were going to do that, we have to decide if we are going to do it, we would have to put in the land development code the regulations associated with this policy. Otherwise, this is a policy that we are not doing, and going back to what I said before, we don't want that. If it's something that we want to do, then we'll move forward with land development code regulations. If it's something that we do not want to do, we need to take it out. So there's a couple of options here. Option one, you can, direct staff or recommend that we work on implementing LDC regulations. And what that would look like is something like, what diameter tree at breast height are you going to protect? Is this a huge Civil War era oak? What is this that we're trying to protect?
Well, I like the idea of protecting those landmark trees, and those are important.
Yes, so then we would move forward with that, and then we can hash out what that program would look like in the code, or, if you wanted, this is something you felt like maybe there was more heritage trees in North Walton, this may be something that you could replace the preservation requirements with, because those two things are gonna overlap some, or we can just remove the policies from the plan. Or other option at your discretion.
Doesn't the same thing apply to this that applied to the previous? If it's in the comprehensive plan, there's not a lot of wiggle room, but if it's in the code, there's some administrative relief that could be possible.
Yes, I mean, you would want your policy to be here, just like it is now. But a policy without the implementing regulations is just kind of a gotcha, which is what we have now.
So it would just be general language in the comprehensive
Right,
plan saying we
right.
would implement those regulations, but all the regulations would be in the land development code.
There's general language in there now, so we're really just deciding we're going to keep it or not.
This is, you're talking about, I'm looking at what we have here. This policy C 1.2.2.
Yes.
Okay, that language is what you're talking about leaving in the comprehensive, and then getting more specific in the code. Is that correct?
That's right. The
Oh,
code
that
would
number?
have the implementation
It's on page
requirements.
8 of 31.
The policy that's existing is C 1.2.1, and there's actually the same policy is in the recreation and open space element.
I like the way that's
So we
worded.
just
I
moved,
like
we
it
just
gives
moved
you-
it.
It gives you the ability in the code to,
Yes, right, yeah, you would want that to be in the code because,
Yeah.
there's gonna have to be, requirements for how that interfaces with preservation,
Right.
the other policies we have and all that, and what,
You just won't get it more defined.
it would have to be, yeah, we can't just have a policy here,
We'll not have any type of guidelines.
right, that's a problem for us.
It's not like that.
yeah. I'm good with that.
Yeah, those big oaks.
People cutting those big trees, I get real upset.
Yeah. Well, most
Wow,
places
those-
do,
Huh?
Yeah, it hurts me when I see someone cut
Oh,
on
man.
Okay, on-lot, the next issue 3 is on-lot preservation. This has been an implementation challenge for us.
Where can we find this at?
This is gonna be. Should have made a note for myself.
Still conservation.
Yes, it's in conservation, we're still in conservation, it's in the preservation section requirements, which are,
Is there a number or something we can?
it's, C 110-2, it's on page 20. Page 20, it starts at policy C-1.10.2.
Okay,
As you know, the county requires preservation of certain natural communities. And pretty much what they are is coastal uplands, so your dune, beach dune, coastal berm, coastal grassland, coastal strand, those things. And then we also require high pine and scrub, basically. And we have a nomenclature change here that's non-substantive, but it catches us up to the most recent Florida Natural Areas inventory definition of these things. So basically, if you have scrub on your site, let's say, then you have to preserve 50% of that on your site. You have the option of buying out an additional 25%. So you pay basically a fee that goes into our conservation fund that we can use to buy preservation lands elsewhere. Historically, we've had two problems with this. One is a management concern in that people set aside this preservation area and then they can never touch it. And it grows up into something totally different than scrub. It goes into mesic flatwood. These natural communities change if they're not managed, if they don't burn, whatever. So it changes to something else. It becomes a fire hazard, basically, because stuff builds up. And it just is unsightly in some cases. I mean, it's just a big mess. So we've had that issue, and we were not able to allow people to clean that up at all. And then we have an implementation concern with people putting the preservation on people's lots. And here's a good example of that. Here's a good picture. Look at lot 29, if you will. This is a plat that gets approved. That's the preservation in sort of the gray area. So basically they got like a 20-foot driveway to get in there and build the house on this little pad. And then the guy's whole backyard is preservation. What happens is he goes and buys his house. He has no idea he has preservation, and he puts his kid's swing set back there. And then we have code enforcement goes out, and we have to tell him, no, you have to move this swing set and put the trees back in here. And it's just a hard situation. You really can't build this house with this 20-foot little way to get in and out, hardly. And B, people don't understand that that's not their yard.
Basically, what you're saying is people in a situation like this, they have the option to go buy 25% of the private land and clear some of it out.
Yes, that's right. They do. They have that option. And what is in this draft, though, that's different that we're proposing is two things. One, we are going to have some code language coming forward where people can apply for a management permit to deal with the management side. And, you know, let's say if all of that preservation was in common areas, an HOA could apply and say, we want to manage this scrub, bring it back to its natural state, clean out some of the fire load material, and the county would be able to issue them a permit based on certain criteria that are preservation-oriented criteria or fire prevention criteria. If it's on people's lots, I mean, it'd be just really hard for us to do that. We would have numerous management plans, but we're proposing in here to say if you want to use that 25% buyout option, you cannot put it on people's yards.
Has to be in common area.
It has to be in common area or buffer area or some other out of people's yards.
Protect people who's buying those houses, what you're trying to do.
Yes.
That just makes too much sense.
And there may be an option to trade off in the code where, like, we give a setback reduction in the rear to help, you know, offset the impact of this to the property owners, because, you know, if you have a preservation area behind you, you really don't need a big setback because you don't have a house back there. So we may be able to give some flexibility there, but that is what is in this draft, is to say if you want to buy it out, you cannot put it on people's lots.
Right now, people clearing it without, and get what they do call code
They just
enforcement.
don't know.
Get in there.
Yes, the
clear it.
neighbors calls, you know, because someone in there has seen the plat, but 90% of people who buy a house don't look at a plat. You know, that's just people like me that look at plats all day. So they just don't know. And it's really, I mean, I hate it. I've had to do it and drive there to your swing set. No, you can't really have this. It's really not your yard, you know. That's just hard.
That don't make any sense whatsoever. I mean,
I like what you're doing.
Yeah, I like the idea of if they want to clear off the preservation area, they got an outline of how much they can actually do, and then they have to get a permit to do it, which, would they have to post a permit or anything like that for the neighbors, if anybody, how do y'all handle that?
I haven't really, I've got to actually start working on drafting that because that's something the board directed us to do ahead of this project. Commissioner Anderson directed that to be done. So we're gonna have to establish some criteria. Yeah, it would be nice if there was some way to let people know that they were, because you guys remember, a couple months ago that one condo on a coastal dune lake wanted to manage, and we had the environmental people here debating. You remember that?
Mhm.
And we just didn't have any criteria, you know, and any way to regulate what they were going to be doing in there. So it would be nice, yes. I think that's probably a good suggestion.
And
Okay.
this don't apply to farmland and anything like that?
No.
This is mainly for the south end?
All of our scrub is on the south end. There is preservation requirements north of the bay, but it's for a different community, and it's not as prevalent. I'll say that.
I don't know.
And it's less preservation.
Got to clear their land.
Well, I like this. So,
Okay, that was easy. We've got some interpretation issues with the coastal upland preservation language.
Where's this at?
This is gonna be actually going back up, oh gosh, okay. It's on page 21, parens 2. Yes. If you see that it says, within the coastal upland vegetative communities located landward of the CCCL, which is Coastal Construction Control Line, which is a FDEP line, and not located within the CPZ, 100% of the that native community has to be preserved outside of your footprint. And then the previous paragraph 1, which is on page 20, says that if you have those communities and they're seaward of the CCCL and or within the CPZ, the applicant for development has to preserve 95%. Okay. There's been historical different interpretations of this language because it is hard to understand. Do you guys understand?
I'm talking about what CPZ is.
Right.
Oh, that's the
Oh,
coastal
the
protection zone.
Okay, and now that is defined as 25 feet.
I heard everybody say, what's the definition of it?
Coastal protection zone.
Okay, thank you.
It's defined as 25 feet, basically from the top of the dune, in most cases. So, if you look at Walton from an aerial, you see this big vegetative strip between the dune, top of the dune, and where our development starts. It is different. If you zoom in on Panama City, you will not see that. It's one of our assets, probably one of the things that makes us different. But these two, there's no change proposed in here because the way I interpret this is anything that's within that first 25 feet, 95% of that has to be preserved. You can basically only put your dune walkover. Anything that is past that CPZ line, it's whatever's outside of your building footprint has to be preserved.
could somebody else interpret that differently?
Yes, other people in the past, and this is true, have interpreted this to mean there's this middle area, if you will, because the CCCL is often landward, most cases is landward of the CPZ. So there's this middle area.
Is there any way to state that, to leave room for less interpretation, to make it more clear?
Yes, we can rewrite this to option 2 here is probably what you're talking about, where we just make it clear that it's 95% of the CPZ and everything else.
Can you use setback lines for these places as to where measured from?
Probably not, because the coastline is ever changing. I think the way the CPZ is defined is based on the highest point of your dune. I don't know if I'm answering. I mean, the setback is typically on the beach, like, you know, from your property line.
Yeah.
So that could be out in the water.
Well, I'm talking about the setback lines where you have to build your condo out measure it out to the limit.
Yes, that is 25 feet, basically. That's the CPZ.
That's what they're using.
Yes, yes. The CPZ effectively establishes like a new setback for the beach, because otherwise people could, you know, do like Panama City. I mean, I don't know if you have a condo and there's the beach. You know?
Well, I know they change their setback lines every so often sometimes, but I mean, if you could use that, that would be more, not so much interpretive, so you can clear it out. It's gonna be a coastal protection.
In this area you're talking about in between the CPZ and the coastal upland, they got a little gray area you're talking about? That's
Well, I
where
mean,
the
in historical interpretation, yes, there has been a gray area because you can really read this, you know, and I'm not faulting anybody because you can really read, you can read this either way.
No,
Well, I think it needs to be as clear as
I
possible.
think it clear as possible.
I think what you're talking about is good.
Yeah,
Is less room for
Option,
interpretation.
you're saying option 2 is clear?
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Option 2 would be, I think that'd be cut and dry.
Yeah, I
don't think
mean,
you can interpret it any other way.
and that wouldn't matter if your coastal construction line was in front or behind your CPZ.
Clear blank.
Yeah.
I like 2.
Yeah, I like 2. I like to be as clear as
What do you
possible.
think, Gary?
Oh, we've gotten into a lot of trouble with interpretation.
Yeah, and I will
Exactly.
mention, too, as we move into a redevelopment scenario on the coast, and we are, where some of the older homes, single-family homes, are getting replaced by multifamily structures. I mean, we still have our 50-foot height limitation, of course, but you know, some of those older homes didn't preserve the native vegetation, it's grass, and so in those cases, we added a line in here that you need to restore. Because that looks like there's no natural preservation when we had a development recently, it looks like the site is scraped because they didn't have a preservation requirement because they had grass. They had the house there that got torn down just had a grass yard.
Well, when they buy a pre-existing structure, tear it down, then they got to come back and build it at a different spot on the lot itself based on the building code requirements. So you further back, and you saying that there should be an item in there saying that they need to restore the area that we conservation back to original state?
The CPZ area, that's right.
Who would determine what that restore is? Are we talking about bushes? Are we talking about sand dunes?
No natural oats and the natural
Vegetation.
vegetation that would be in that natural community. And there's environmental professionals that do that, and we do restoration plans in the office, and we tell people what they need to put back that meets.
That's not that difficult.
Yeah,
No,
I mean,
it's
you're
not
not putting
difficult.
Bermuda
Actually,
grass.
It's a good idea, because for one, the erosion and stuff like that on these lots and stuff like that, especially on the Gus side.
Yeah, a lot of times DEP makes them do it anyway.
Yeah.
If there's any impact to the dune, you usually have to revegetate in native vegetation. Okay. Okay, we're gonna stop with conservation. If you guys wanna hear from the public, is that what we're doing? And then, we'll get back at it.
You're gonna be done by 6:30.
Huh?
You gonna take me out?
Shit.
I'm right with you. My wife will leave me.
Wanna go back in the slides to the first issue?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
you forgot. First one was wetland.
okay, I don't really know how to even interpret these item numbers then, to be honest with you, so. On the conservation, as it's listed on the agenda, we have 2 people that signed up.
Okay.
Mike Clark.
Hi, my name is Mike Clark. Moved to Walton County in 1979. Moved here to establish vineyards and build a winery in Defuniak Springs. And at the same time, I was researching land for a large property owner, which at the time was the second largest landholder in the county, second to St. Joe. I'm very familiar with land issues. I'm here to talk about the 1 per 20. I think it's, to be honest, ridiculous. after you go through the Corps and DEP, there are two types of wetlands. There's a flowing wetland, which is Corps. There's isolated wetlands, which is DEP. And I can tell you from experience, not all wetlands are good. There are wetlands that are not good, believe it or not. I think this was put in the plan in 2011 when the bottom fell out. There wasn't a lot of people involved at that time, and except for maybe a group of conservationists who were, in my judgment, were misinformed and had that inserted. And I feel like this is going to really impact Walton County, especially all the land north of 98. You know, if it's a good wetland, a flowing wetland, the Corps is not going to let you do anything. If it's an isolated wetland, if it's a good wetland, it's going to be minimal impact, if any at all. If they do let you fill the wetland, you have to demuck it, you fill it in with fill. It's actually better for PERG. And I've been asking at these public hearings, you know, why is it such an issue about filling wetlands? And the final answer I get is stormwater. And filling a wetland doesn't impact stormwater. The clustering of buildings, that happened about 10, 12 years ago when the Corps and DP, they used to let you fill the whole parcel, and they've stopped that. So that clustering's been going on for a long time. They don't let you do it anymore. So why, after mitigating with the Corps and DEP, which is really rough, why would the county want to penalize you when you've been paying taxes on land for a long time? You know, your tax rate isn't lower because you have some wetlands on it. And if the Corps and DEP will let you fill it, and there's many reasons, it may not even need to fill it for a house. I just don't think it's right to penalize you. I mean, we built a wetlands bridge one time over a little spring, and we even had to mitigate for the shade for the wetlands bridge.
So you don't think, I mean, just show some ignorance here. In your opinion, filling wetlands doesn't do anything? Stormwater has to have some place to go. If wetlands are filled, that doesn't impact that?
If it's a flowing wetland, yeah, you can't impact it. You can't go in there and stop a flowing wetland. But if it's an isolated wetland, what happens when it rains? It gets bigger.
Mm-hmm.
If, you know, a lot of times the ground's already saturated in a wetland, so all it does is get bigger. And then the vegetation grows out. And then when it gets dry back to normal, then it goes back down. But your vegetation keeps moving out, so you actually, when they go to look for the wetland line, it's actually usually more than what they think it is.
When do you think the wetland works for a better description, like a retention pond? And that's what we imply. You know, the water got to go somewhere. The rainwater got to go somewhere.
I agree.
The wetland holds that water till it gets evaporated back out by the sun. Okay? So if you fill that in, how is it going to hold that water then?
Well, that is the answer. The answer is retention.
Pardon me?
The answer is retention. You know, when DEP and Corps give you a permit, you're supposed to contain that water on your property unless there's a certain amount that's already flowing out, and then they don't want that amount increased. So after you jump through all those hoops, pay a large amount of money for mitigation, and then turn around and get penalized from the county, it just doesn't make sense to me. But retention is the answer. That's the only thing that's going to solve stormwater in this county.
Well, see, the retention pond you describing, you talking about just holding your water, but you know, a lot of groundwater comes from other different areas of property, not just yours property.
Right.
So you talking about doing a retention pond on your property, filling in the wetland, building a retention pond just to serve the wetland, the water that you might have, rainwater that you got to contain. What about the surrounding areas?
I don't agree with that theory, because like I said, the Corps and DEP, you have to retain your water. You can't let it just go anywhere. You have to retain it through retention. So why penalize, the issue is the units. Why would you want to penalize them on their units to prevent them from transferring it to the uplands? It doesn't matter how many they get, they're only gonna allow what's gonna fit on that upland portion. And all this land north of 98, this is gonna doom it. The county's in need of workforce housing, that's where it's gonna be. But this is just another hurdle for landowners and developers, and I'm not a developer, but it's just another hurdle for them to overcome to try and earn a living. I don't understand it. It just makes no sense to me.
So what would be your solution?
Well,
What would be your best practice?
I have my own idea. I mean, if you drive over to Destin and you go behind Best Buy and all those, they've got power lines through there, and all their retention is underneath those power lines. And we've got several miles of power lines through here. Why couldn't we do retention under those power lines to catch the stormwater? I mean, there's other ways to skin the cat.
I
Than
certainly
to
don't
penalize the landowner.
I certainly don't want to become a Destin over here.
Pardon?
I certainly don't want to become a Destin over here.
Well, you gotta have retention. You're gonna have
I
stormwater.
understand that, I understand that,
I'm not saying to be like Destin.
yeah.
I'm just saying that's a solution.
But
Retention, in my
so
opinion,
you
is
think
gonna-
that the county shouldn't do anything other, let the state deal with it and not worry about it? Is what you're saying, right?
I'm saying after what you go through with the Corps and DEP,
The county should stay out of it.
the county should stay out of that part of it.
All right,
The county should focus on, you've done a great job on the coastal dune lakes. I think there's a lot of things that could be done with the forest. And I'd like to see somebody do something with Hogtown Point. That's one of the pristine ecosystems around anywhere.
well, I appreciate your position. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I appreciate what you're saying.
I understand. Thank you for your time.
I just want to mention that I did put that in the that is the slide basically that came from those public workshops. So I did put it in here for consideration, we did listen.
Okay,
I don't believe I signed in.
let me get to Chris Stoyce.
He's left.
You left? Okay, then you're up.
Okay. Melissa Ward. I'm with Dunlap and Chipman, and there's a couple of things. First, I want to say thank you very much for having this hearing, and thank you very much to the staff for all the public meetings they've had. They've had several, and they have listened. I actually came in and spoke with Kristen for a couple of hours. Bless her heart, she had to listen to me blabber on. I want to say that to the density question in wetlands, the diagram or the pictorial I have here is very useful for people to understand, because it's imperative to know, as you're making decisions on how this is being readopted or changed, is that the 1 per 20 or 1 per 10, whatever comes out of these meetings, is the, if you will, punishment for impacting wetlands that you could avoid if you wanted to, okay? So that's my understanding of how this is being perceived. So we have wetlands we can avoid that need to be impacted, and wetlands that we don't really have to touch if we can just stay out of it. And I believe that's the difference, and it's a big difference. In the instance where you have property that is rather large, and it is mostly wetlands, and you couldn't possibly cluster all that density to the top, what we will have to have, and I'm asking for you all to consider, and I know the staff has already talked to Kristen about it at length, is good language to explain what is unavoidable. It needs to be something we understand. We being everyone. You, when you make a decision on a development order, and me when I try to explain it to a developer. Because we have to know when we're crossing that line. You can't just tell somebody, go out and be good. You have to tell them what it means. Or don't be bad. Well, what does that mean? So that's going to be important when you go to the Land Development Code. In the instance where somebody, if there's still a need to say, warn people not to touch certain areas of wetlands, it's possible that I would like to see a varying degree of punishment, if you will, not just a standard 1 to 20 or 1 to 10. That won't come up till you rewrite it to the land development code, I know, but I would like for you to think about that, because it's very pertinent to people who are trying to do. In fact, should there be an incentive for doing affordable or workforce housing? So that if they do have to impact the wetlands, instead of being a 1 to 20 or a 1 to 10, maybe they get a reduced density but not so penalized. I'm just looking for options for those type of developments. In addition to that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening about the CCCL and CPZ. It has been a problem. They have very carefully lined out that if you have areas that have already been destroyed, a replanting is necessary. And what that does for the developer is it says to them, if you need to build below this area, and this is cleared out, but you're having to impact an area, you can replant down here and make up that 95% that you need to preserve. It helps people. Otherwise, this area, as it is right now, that's vacant, you don't get to count that area in the 95%. It's only the area with vegetation. So if you're able to replant it, then that whole area is counted, and you're not penalized for somebody else in the 1980s building a rather good-sized house very, very close to the beach as much as possible.
Right.
So I appreciate that. And the only other thing was in discussion about the preservation areas not on the lot. It is critical that they do not put them on the lot. There is not a single landscape buffer or preservation area that surrounds a piece of property on the lot that hasn't been accidentally removed, in so far as I know. Not a single one, in some form or fashion.
Right.
The only thing I would suggest is, at one point, I think I heard that maybe in a landscape buffer or something. That is not useful, because a landscape buffer is still typically within the lot, and it is not helpful. So, and there will be developers who are gonna balk at that, but in reality, it should always be something that they can maintain, which needs to be a separate piece of property.
It should be on, something they're responsible for, not somebody else responsible.
I believe so, yes.
I agree.
In addition, you asked some interesting questions about what the property appraiser does with that. Subdivisions and homeowners association and condo associations, when they take ownership of that piece of property that is a preservation, like say it's a lot, it's not the same as common area. They can tell the property appraiser about that. What they have to be careful of is, once it becomes a separate piece, sometimes they give them parcel ID numbers. And when the HOA decides not to pay taxes on it, they sell it, and then somebody gets a piece of property they can't do anything with. So we have to be careful of how they recognize that piece of property. But it is a valid question. HOAs have been battling it for some time.
Oh, thank you. I mean, clarity, like you brought up earlier, is I think why we're doing this, is to clarify things and make it easier to understand. And hopefully, as we go through this process, we'll get there.
Just as a point of reference, the 1 per 20 density issue has been in there since they first adopted the comp plan. It's a 1996 rule, or 1998 at the very early. It's not been there. It's not recent. It's not in 2011. That's been there forever, and if you were asked the planning department how many people try to put houses in the wetlands, and they tell you not very many, it's because everybody already knows. They don't let you don't bother talking to them. You can't do it. The impact is 1 per 20. It's dangerous, it's difficult, it's whatever.
Okay.
It is difficult to go through the DEP and the Corps, because right now mitigation prices are like $75,000 for a single an acre point, so you have to pay up to those mitigation points. And then of course their requirements are difficult. But it's very much worth the county moving that stuff to the land development code so they can work within a PUD if necessary to move things around. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Anybody else that wants to speak on this portion? Okay. Let's take about 5 minutes and we'll come back and move on to next.
I think Kathleen's
Give me that while you're there.
I figured out an impervious surface ratio of 0.85.
Oh, gosh. I hope the rest of this goes quicker.
I think it will. I think this is the
The-
most difficult part.
how do you transfer by not affecting the wetlands? You saying you
Okay.
transfer the,
Thank you.
I was gonna say, how do you transfer that? You already got 25. How do you transfer that over?
It don't matter if it goes back to here.
What do you think? You think we can?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know what kind of discussion there'll be, Frank. I would not bid on it.
Don't leave here without me.
All right, we ready to get going?
What happens to that?
Then we're gonna call the meeting back to order.
You go, Chairman.
Where we at?
Where we at? Let's get it. Yeah, 10 minutes.
Kristen, do we need to handle,
10 minutes?
do we need to handle motions, I guess, element
Yes.
by element?
Yes, that's what I was gonna suggest, if we
Okay.
can go back to those issues, and maybe
Yep.
I can summarize where I think you are, and then we could get a
Get a
vote.
motion on that portion?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, so on wetlands, what I think I heard is that pretty much we're okay with the language that's here, that moves the penalty for situations where you're all wetlands to the code, but leaves the 1/20 and .10 for situations where you have buildable uplands.
I got one question about that.
Again.
Again, why don't y'all just let the state and federal government handle the wetlands? I think then y'all wouldn't have to deal with the county, because they got to go through the engineering department and environmental protection agency and stuff like that.
We really
What
do.
20 what I'm talking about.
I mean, we do not go out and tell them what are wetlands, and our wetland criteria is based on the state and federal criteria. So, I mean, we don't go out and, some counties have their own wetland policies where they are above and beyond the state and federal. Right? We don't do that. We rely on their jurisdictional determinations.
So you adopt what they have already in place?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is 1 to 20 sort of too bad? Would it be better to go to 1 to 10, or?
Yes, that you can decide that if you want to go with the 1/10 that's in the code, or the 1/20. We really don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference. I will say that the workforce housing, that is something we're going to get to in a minute. We are working on that to where they have that density bonus available, and there may be some flexibility there as we move to that section. But yeah, I mean, it does say 1/10 in the code and 1/20 in the comp plan. So,
Is there, what's your position on what the gentleman was talking about as far as different types of wetlands?
I think he really was just describing the difference between how the Army Corps of Engineers regulates wetlands versus how the Florida Department of Environmental Protection regulates wetlands. They have slightly different criteria for determining what is a wetland, and the Corps are more connected or hydrologically connected, and DEP regulates more. They do. It's a state of Florida thing. We're a low-lying state. So they have their own criteria.
Okay. Well, I'm a firm believer that we locally should control local. I mean, we have to follow what the state and the federal government say, but I think that Walton County has to have what's best for Walton County as well. So.
Yeah, I did include. I mean, we listened, and I don't want anybody to think that we didn't include those other options, because we did, and we're prepared to talk about those. This slide here is, letting the underlying density and intensity apply to those whole wetland areas. That's one way to go. It's really a policy call.
Okay.
So that's what I heard you say, though, that you were good with our current disincentive for when you have buildable uplands, and for situations clarifying when it's almost all wetlands or all wetlands, And right now, we let the DEP and core criteria determine that. You know, if you got a site that's all DEP and core wetlands, you're gonna have an issue anyway. Then you would have some reduced density intensity in the code, which we will determine later.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
We need a motion.
We're gonna need a motion.
We can, we can either handle it one at a time or all together, however you prefer. It might be easier one at a time.
Yeah, I think so.
So I guess if you could
Be a
just,
lot less confusing in the end.
yes. So, does anybody want to make a motion to Kristen's,
I'll make a motion to pass.
We'll pass
as
on.
stated by
Let- let-
Kristen?
let's-
The wetland. You talking about doing one item at a time or? as a
I
group?
think each of Kristen's 4 issues that she brought up, yeah.
Yeah,
You're wanting to approve that?
No,
Well-
no, this is one option that I wanted to include because we did hear this in the discussion, that this would say if you're all wetlands, we have no penalty for fill. It's the underlying density intensity.
if you're all wetland,
Yeah,
But that's not the same thing as in,
that's right. Now, there's a different chart in your, what I heard you say is what is actually written in the language here, which is, there's a different chart, it's on page, it just defers what your penalty would be to the code. It says there will be a penalty if you're all wetlands, but it's undefined in the comprehensive plan,
I think that should be in the
And-
code.
And that's as it's currently written in the draft.
as is currently written in the
that's
draft.
what we have.
That's correct.
That's what I like.
Yeah, right here, what we got here
Yeah.
on the TV.
And it would be
This is
defined,
what I like.
and it would be, no,
What?
this is what you have in front of you is not the same thing as up there.
Right.
Which glass is on front?
Yeah, this is it looks the same, but this is one of the options that we heard, and I have a whole bunch of them here on the second slide
Yeah, you
too.
messed up the color.
I like what we have in front of us that's in the packet.
I
Okay.
do too.
And leave this in the comp plan and let the code determine what the penalties are.
Okay.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
I'll second that motion.
Any further questions? All in favor of that motion? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? That part passes.
Okay. I think, will they need an overall motion on
Yes.
the whole language?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do that at the
Okay,
end.
all right.
So what we'll do is we'll take each of Kristen's 4 issues, and then at the very end, we'll just have a motion to approve everything else as drafted.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. You guys are awesome. Can I just say that? This is great. We're moving on. Okay, tree preservation. So we have the 3 options here. What I think I heard you say is that you are in favor of working on implementing land development code regulations for heritage tree preservation.
Just having a general statement in the comp
Leave
plan,
the general statement in the comp plan and put their, yeah,
be specific in the code.
correct.
Yes, that's what I like.
I'm with you.
We have a motion?
I'll make a motion to pass it.
Okay. We have a second? We have a motion, we have a second. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Okay. On lot preservation, you would be deciding, I'm pretty sure you said is that you were in favor, or the discussion was in favor of the current language, which you have before you, that would require the preservation not be included on lots when using the 25% buyout option.
That's
I
correct.
like this,
Yeah.
but I'd like to make an amendment to it, and what it is that for them to get the buyout option, people need to be notified around that we discussed earlier.
When people are managing, when people are gonna go in and manage or clean up, trim, cut preservation areas, right? Yes.
Yes. Couldn't the code have some clear guidelines for management so that you don't have to come to the courthouse and get a permit every time you go there and burn a tree, burn the undergrowth? couldn't we have some, in the code, have some clear guidelines?
Could, in conflict with what he's saying, because we won't be able to notify folks, and we wouldn't really have a record, and, I mean, without the permit, we don't really know what people are doing, I guess, that would be the downside.
With the permit, you'd be able to inspect and see what people are doing, plus you notify the neighbors, then the conflict won't be so bad.
And you will not have to go to the courthouse. We are moving to online permitting, which is beyond awesome. It's going to be super easy to submit your permitting documents, and this would be like a $25 permit, you know, like a land clearing permit. This would not be, I mean, you could make that recommendation that it not be onerous, I guess is what I'm saying.
But that would be more toward the land development code.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
But the language we're wanting to approve now is that you can't put preservation on a lot. It has to be in common areas,
If you're using the buyout option.
if you're using the buyout.
That's what's in the current language.
I'll make a motion to that effect.
What about the notifying the neighbors or the other people in the community?
I think that's more for the land development code.
But I'm hearing you. I'm getting ready to bring that code language back to you guys soon.
That would be code language, not.
That's actually coming though really soon, because they wanted that done before this project.
In place.
Right,
Okay.
correct.
So we have a motion, do we have a second?
I second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That part passes. You're on a roll.
You're doing a very good job too.
Well, we have said this stuff about 400 times. Okay, coastal upland preservation, clarification. I heard you discuss option 2, which would make it really simple in the language, saying that 95% must be preserved within the CPZ, and outside of that, it's whatever's outside of your building footprint, and that does include a restoration requirement for the CPZ.
I make a motion to approve option 2.
We have a motion? Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. I think you just earned that promotion.
Now
And
we need,
then-
well, now we need the,
Yes,
The
so
overall
now,
one.
if there's no other discussion on any of the other changes in the draft, we just need a motion to approve
For
that
this
draft.
portion,
Yes, for the whole elements, conservation
whole
element.
conservation.
all conservation. I'm good.
I make that motion.
We have a motion that the draft language is acceptable.
Yes.
I second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Awesome. I think these are good, consensus-based and rational solutions, and I really appreciate that. Okay. Coastal management, this one's gonna be easy, actually. We did the hard stuff already, so,
I hope so.
coastal management, there was a lot of what I'm calling non-substantive changes, because it was really stuff that was relocated. This is a new element. It is required by statute, so we went ahead and created this new element, and we are using existing policies that we had scattered everywhere to meet the statutory requirements.
So you just bring everything from other places, putting them here.
Yes, for the
No
most
real
part.
changes.
And we did add some stuff, and I'll get to that. But there really, I mean, there's really no big policy issue in here for me to point out to you.
What are the major changes?
We did add, we added some language about hurricane evacuation and mitigation strategy. One thing I will mention is that we have flood zone language here that we moved here, and we also have flood zone language in the land use element. So I'm really thinking that the next round that includes the land use element, we're going to be trying to merge that language, because I said before, we do not want multiple places saying sort of the same thing. That's
Mhm.
bad. You know, we moved the coastal dune lake stuff to the coastal management element, so it's all in one place here, because it helps us meet our statutory requirements. We actually were already doing what we needed to do to meet those statutory requirements. It was just a matter of putting it in the right place.
And this coastal dune lake stuff, when you moved it all here, were there substantive changes within that language
No, sir.
occurred?
No, none whatsoever.
The buffers are still,
Everything is exactly as, per the settlement agreement that we recently went
Okay.
through.
So you get consolidated.
That's
Put it-
right,
Put it all in the same place.
yeah.
Okay.
I like it.
we just need a motion.
Yes, so this would just be a motion to approve the
Oh, we
draft.
gotta use, I'm sorry, I was putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on this portion? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And a motion would be in order.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Okay, moving on to recreation, open space and greenways. We have, I think, we just have one policy issue in this element. As you know, well, let me go, there was a statutory change in 2011 where they said that parks are no longer subject to concurrency. Does everybody know what concurrency means? Concurrency,
Explain.
it means that when you approve a development as a local government, the infrastructure to serve that development must be in place or planned for and funded. And in the original growth management legislation from the early 90s, that included transportation, parks, water, sewer, roads, and then later on they added schools. And now, in 2011, the only items subject to concurrency by statute are water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater.
So basically, what you want the developer to do, they have the assets to put these in place at the time of the development.
That's right.
Now, that's a good thing. I
So
don't see a lot
road-
of problems with that.
Yes, Florida has always had a very good requirement for ensuring that development does not proceed ahead of infrastructure development.
So roads aren't included anymore?
Roads are not included anymore, but Walton County
That's right.
has always had that requirement, and we continue to have that. And actually, Walton County has a very good concurrency system with very little room for improvement, honestly. We do not shift the cost burden to the taxpayers for new development infrastructure entirely. It's pretty equitable. There's different ways you can look at that. Either, the development can go in with no infrastructure, and the taxpayers have to fund that infrastructure, and that is how it is in some places. Or as the development occurs, they're charged a portion of that infrastructure cost, and that keeps pace with,
How's that calculated? I'm just curious.
in different ways. I mean, what we've been doing for Parks and Rec, which is where we are, is we have the recreational plat fee. And we charge single-family developments. Either you dedicate land in your development for a park, and you give that to the county, or you pay a fee in lieu of that dedication, which is the recreational plat fee, the infamous recreational plat fee.
But how's that calculated?
It's, I guess,
6% of
6% of your,
Of the
Land
value,
value.
unimproved land value,
yeah,
determined from the property appraisers.
Okay.
yeah. And there's really no voodoo there, it's pretty straightforward. But,
In your opinion, or Mac, in your opinion, is that fee that's collected, is it sufficient for what we're trying to achieve? I'm just curious more than anything else right now on that.
I think we've had some reasonable success with the recreational plat fee. Our biggest problem that we've identified is that it doesn't apply to everybody that impacts the county's recreational opportunities. Right now, it's only collected when a residential development plats. It's collected at the platting stage, which is the final stage for residential development. It does not apply to a 500-unit condominium. It doesn't apply to a 100-unit apartment complex.
Is that gonna change?
We're proposing to add multifamily, in addition to single-family with this particular change
Right.
to make it more equitable. And Kristen will go on to tell you that we're proposing to remove the level of service standard because it doesn't directly relate to the impact fee. But to spread out that impact fee across all particular types of developments that create this impact, we're proposing to add multifamily, which we think
Well,
would be.
multifamily has a tremendous impact.
It could probably be argued that they might have a greater impact than a
A single
single-family
family,
neighborhood
absolutely.
might.
That helps us with the legalities too, a little bit.
Yeah.
What's the option 3?
Option 3 is to move towards a more of a per unit, a true impact fee. What we have right now with the land dedication and fee in lieu is more of an exaction. It's not necessarily it's not necessarily a true impact fee. Honestly, impact fees would be the most defensible, but will also be the most intensive. It will require a tremendous amount of staffing and funding because we would have to keep up with master planning and capital projects, and each development would be looked at individually. There'd be an individual calculation for each development, basically, that would be a little bit more intensive. So it's a
Wouldn't
much
that be the
easier.
most equitable way to do it, though? I mean, from a very simplistic viewpoint, that's what I asked that.
It's definitely probably the most defensible, and it doesn't mean that that you couldn't have a regional park somewhere else, that is not right next to your development area, because all there has to be really is a nexus between the actual development's impacts and what you're building.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess part of the reason I asked that, because one of the biggest complaints that I've heard in South Walton is there are no recreational facilities for youth sports and stuff like that, not sufficient organized sports and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But coming from I was in a much larger city for a long time, one of the things that was done there is what we're talking about here. I mean, you went in to develop a neighborhood. I mean, you were either going to provide recreational facilities or a place for kids to play, or you're going to pay dearly to help do that on a regional basis. Because to me, it's critical to have a place for kids to get out and do things, or adults to get out and do things.
Are we building a huge sports complex?
Well, I understand that.
But I think the option 3 is not only more defensible and fair, but what you get is a lot of these little Band-Aid or bandbox parks that are not really very useful. And this option would give the county the resources to build bigger, more functional recreational
Wouldn't the county
facilities.
need more control of the money with option 3?
If you want just straight money, then you would have to go to option 3. If you cannot, under our current option, it has to be an option for them to give that money.
The county can build
Yeah.
a park that is where you want to.
And a functional park.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Not anywhere.
But not anywhere, but where it impacts the people that are, I mean, if you're building a 500 unit condominium, somewhere in that area, you're gonna have to build a park that's functional, not one of these little cookie cutter that's got a few little things and a barbecue grill.
The county needs to be able to control that too. If there's 3 of these 500 unit condos
We
going
need a
in,
bigger park.
you don't need 3 small little areas. You could take that money, the county
Yeah,
could do that.
can you do amenities off-site? I guess that's what we're asking. If you
That
got
actu-
multiple complexes, you don't have enough room based off the wetlands or the density that you got there for common
You
area.
can't currently, but
Option
that's-
3 would provide
option
that.
2 would, option 2 actually, and you could do 1 and 2, you can take any combination of these. One of the things brought up in our series of public meetings was that the developers would like the option of doing just that. But there would have to be criteria, it can't be like trash land.
In your opinion, what would you suggest? Because you're more familiar with this than we are.
For us, honestly, unless we changed our staffing and funding allocation for planning, I think we really need to stick with 1 and 2 right now. But that could be a policy issue that they decide they want to do. But I don't recommend putting big programs in your comp plan that you're not going to put the people and money behind, because that would be disastrous for us to go down that route.
All we're doing really is a recommendation.
Right.
And wouldn't it be better to recommend the best way? And I'm like the chairman, that just seems fair, and it seems like that would give the county far more options to do things right.
But you know, you hear it all the time, like the chairman expressed. People complain because, you know, the neighbors are to build out. There's nothing for the kids, for activities for them to do, other than go to the beach. And there's no complex that's close by, large enough and close enough. And some of these areas where they build these large apartment complexes and stuff, or subdivisions, there should be something built inside that subdivision that will allow these amenities. And if they can't do it, then they should take the funding for the amenities and let the county use it in that way to create the amenities at a different location.
I think therein lies your conundrum,
Problem. Yeah,
because
how you gonna make it happen?
if you want the land dedication, you cannot go to that straight impact fee option.
But I'm not really interested in the land dedication as much as I am the money to do things right.
I think the county can do a much better job planning in the bigger picture than each individual developer can. That's my opinion. And I understand it's much more intensive for the county,
Yes.
But
tremendously so.
if we're gonna recommend a best policy, a best use, I think that's the best policy and the best use. Let the county decide what it can,
Well,
and build things that are really nice.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, one significant difference here. Option 1 and 2 essentially lets the money get paid before we have to determine what to do with it, which allows some flexibility to change a plan based on emerging priorities. The latter choice is a much more straightforward. You have to create your list of projects so you can determine how much the impact fee needs to be, which puts all the planning out in front, anticipating what the community is going to need some number of years down the road.
I can see that.
Master planning and capital budgeting would have to happen.
I can see where that's.
Which puts all the expense of determining what those things are out in front, and the county would bear all that expense up front.
I just want to make sure that whatever we do, whatever we recommend, is sufficient to ensure that there's adequate facilities available for not just the kids, but kids
Families.
primarily to me, but also for adults to be able to get out and do things outside.
And I'm not sure, I understand what you're saying.
I do too.
And maybe we're not to that, but a quarter-acre little bandbox park ain't gonna do a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. So is there some way that we could tweak it to encourage them to just pay the buyout and give the county the money?
But our experience is most people do choose the buyout option.
Yeah, they
They
do.
do.
There with us, there, that's good.
I mean,
We don't have to worry
That
about it.
has been our experience. Most people do choose that. Where we're falling short is we're not able to collect the buyout from multifamily.
But we need to do it, we need to.
And that,
So
we
that's what
absolutely
we
need
need
to
to make
do.
sure then that is at, and that's what this does.
Yes, sir.
And that helps us be more, you know, theoretically, the fee that you charge, should be proportional, you know, across the impacting,
Per unit.
yeah, whoever is impacting your recreational facility. So it would help us get closer. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's perfect. I'd be wrong if I
No.
did, but it's better.
Okay.
And you think the multifamily residential option would accomplish at least part of that?
Yes, it would help
And the
us
fees would be set in the
get
code.
towards something more defensible if we were to get challenged. You know, if a developer was to come in and say, I'm not paying that plat fee because you disproportionately charge single family, I think they'd have a pretty good argument.
Well, Lord knows we don't need to do that.
You know, yeah, and so it would help, I think, with that. And we would obviously generate more money, which would help provide the facilities.
So option 2 is what you're saying now?
1 and 2.
One and two,
One and two.
if you wanted to do both. 2 would give the developers an option to dedicate land off-site, but we would need to have criteria in the code,
Right.
you know, that can't be like wetland undevelopable
Right.
trash land, or, you know, it has to be in the vicinity and usable.
Okay.
But
I'm
if,
good
if he
with that.
wanted to build a Frank Brown Park,
Well, then get back to the
theoretically,
wetland,
that
talking about
was,
doing the
he could
field.
have at it.
So if he did, that's what we were talking about earlier with the wetlands, if they did fill on that part of the wetland for common area, like parks or something like that, they could do that, could they not? If they still had the
Yes.
penalty?
I'm still wanting to.
Keep the density.
I got a question, is that money earmarked for parks when it goes?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
It's
It
restricted to
cannot
that
be,
purpose.
it cannot be, that would be
Can't
really
used
wrong.
for anything else.
Yeah, yeah, we can't
Well, I'm good
build a
with that,
hospital
too.
or,
I'm good with
I'll make a motion, are we ready for that?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'll make a
Does
motion.
anybody here want to talk on this part?
Sorry.
Okay, we'll close public comments.
My question, I'm sorry, so just, the question is, so for, sorry, she's waking me up.
Talk up.
Specifically, the county has, the current language in the comprehensive plan states that a developer, any developer doing a development, a residential development, is required to dedicate a portion of their land. But as an alternative to developers who don't have enough land, you can pay. It's a pay and go kind of program, just like the traffic, because it was part of the LOS
Right.
level of service. So just to be clear, because I heard a lot of conversation, I was trying to keep up, you guys are doing a great job. You are not choosing the third option
Correct,
currently.
correct.
Okay, I encourage you, when it comes forward to the land development code, that you encourage staff, and they're doing a fabulous job, to consider certain levels of, again, levels of things to make things more equitable to the county, but equally fair to all of these developers. When you do a simple land swap, it's based on the value of the land. If you have a piece of property that has been agricultural for 30 years and the value is really low, you are not getting a lot of money. But if you can turn that over and put out 200 units, townhomes on it, and you're gonna do multifamily now, then you need to figure out the balance, because loads of developments came through as agricultural in 2004 and paid little to nothing.
I
That's all I
agree,
needed to say.
100%.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We want to get our bang for our buck.
All right, any other comments? All right, commissioners?
Now I'll make the motion to adopt option 1 and 2.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And then we would just need a motion to adopt all other changes as drafted in the recreation element.
I move, so move.
We have a motion, we have a second? Tom, second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Number 4.
okay, our last element, housing.
This is the last one?
Yep.
Last one. You guys are rocking and rolling. I'm really happy. We're doing great. This is where all that groundwork helps out. Okay, so there are some substantive changes here. Believe it or not, our housing element was really loaded up with a lot of will-dos, must-dos that were not something that we could realistically do. Substantive changes, we did add the accessory dwelling unit authorizing language, because that is currently allowed by our code. It's authorized in statute. And anytime you change density or intensity, you really should have that authorizing language in your plan, because that's the originator of your density and intensity requirements. We removed the target date where we were going to increase affordable housing units by 10%. We're supposed to do that by 2015.
Did we make it?
I don't think so.
And the county
We maybe
took
have
care
done
of that
some
for us,
things.
at least temporarily.
We do, the county does administer Section 8 program and shipping home, so I mean, we do some things. And we are thinking that we would like to have, this is a big change, substantive change.
Where you at?
I'm on the third bullet down here. We added the statutory definition for workforce housing. And the anticipation here is that we will create a unified, we have density bonus system currently in different places in our code and comp plan. In some places it says affordable housing, some places it says workforce housing. These are different things, very different things. So we're anticipating, and this is sort of setting up the policy guidance, to have a unified workforce housing density bonus. And we are using the statutory definition of what price point workforce housing is at. This is like police, fire, nurses. It's a different income category than affordable, which is, you know, your very low income housing.
Workforce, correct me if I'm wrong, workforce is mainly, doesn't have a great deal of assistance, whereas affordable has the Section 8 and
That's right.
that has assistance to it.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, some communities build affordable housing, you know, apartments and things like that. We do not have that kind of delivery program. County, that's a rare thing for a county, really. That's more of an urban city type function. So we'll be following that through as we go through the code and other places in the comp plan where that is, to make sure that's consistent across the board. Not a new thing. We already have the density bonus, but clarifying what it is new. Substandard units by 20%, we were supposed to remove by a date certain, that's gone. And we also removed a lot of policies related to sustainable housing, which would have entailed us having a building inspection program geared towards energy efficient residential structures. Some counties, some cities, there's one in Texas that's really famous for it, Austin, where they have a lot of energy efficiency requirements on top of the building code requirements for new residential structures. Like building materials, water systems, electrical systems.
Green homes.
Green homes, yes, there you go. That, so we do not currently have that kind of program, so we have removed those policies from our comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
And I will say that the Florida Building Code has come a long way along those lines in recent years even. So we added some policy to be consistent with manufactured group homes that the state statutes really mandate. Okay, let's see. Ooh, there's only one policy issue, and it deals with historic structure preservation. We are required by statute to address historic preservation. So we have to have some policy in our plan geared towards historic preservation. Right now we've got a lot of heavy policy in there that says we're going to do all this mapping and identification and all of that, which we could do, but we have to commit to staff and fund that type of a program. Or we can work towards addressing sort of what we are doing. We have Grayton and Point Washington down here where probably most of our historic structures are. We can work through those neighborhood plans and what Defuniak Springs is doing, because they have historical structures there. And it's just really, you know, how much do you want to go with this kind of thing.
I think we're doing a good job.
Just go with what we're doing, which is option one, I think, really.
Could we, there's some places in Freeport that would be nice.
Freeport, in the city limits?
In the city limits, so that don't count.
Yeah, don't want to. But we can, if they are doing anything, we can use that in our support documentation to help
Yes,
us
if
further.
we have anything that would address places like just, in Mossy had the old community center, the old schoolhouse.
The schoolhouse in Glendale.
Yeah, I mean, places like that. Because those are important structures in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
No.
Why don't we just put Walton County in Germany?
Yeah, I'm just saying, that type of historical structure, I think we need to try to figure out
Yeah,
how to deal with.
So,
Because you don't want someone going in, tearing those places down, or making dramatic changes to them.
And if they're identified through code, it might help get grants to. actually
Exactly, be able
fix
to
it.
do some improvements and stuff to it.
so maybe try to work on getting a grant to help identify some of these places.
Yeah, I think, because there are some, and I say specifically, places like we just mentioned that we know about, that in the communities where we live, that those structures are historically significant. And trying to figure out a way to protect
maintain
them
them.
or maintain them, if there's grant money available to get to improve them.
The old house down in the valley that was the first It's the oldest house in the
Yeah.
county.
I mean, Mac, I mean, you know anything about that?
Well, there are a number of state programs that provide funds to investigate and rehabilitate and or repurpose. I mean, that level of funding fluctuates with the legislature's
Right.
temperature, I think. But presently, the city of Defuniak is implementing a grant from the Division of Historic Resources that is intended to resurvey the existing, I think, 200 plus structures that are at least listed on the National Register in Defuniak Springs, and to inventory and possibly qualify an additional 300 structures beyond that. So there are grant programs available for specific type programs like this, and the city of Defuniak is within Walton County the deepest into those because we have a concentration of historic buildings.
Was there a way that we could do something here to try to address those places in Walton County, outside of the city limits?
We could certainly have language in here, which I think we do, that speaks to the need to inventory those kinds of things without putting a specific time frame on it. That was
Right.
one of the things that we were trying to pull out of this element, all of those things that had definite time frames. And when this was done the last time, DCA,
Required.
predecessor to DEO, required those kinds of things. Now we don't have those
Well,
kinds of requirements.
I'm sure that you'll appreciate my next comment then. Because without a time limit, when does anything ever happen?
Without a time limit and the proper
And I'm not
reason.
criticizing anybody, it's a real question.
No, I agree with that, but in this particular case, the county hasn't devoted the necessary resources to be able to accomplish these things within those timeframes.
Right.
So we're taking another look at whether or not we should have those timeframes in the code. Not a commentary on whether or not we should be doing those kinds of
Right.
things.
That-
I would like to see something in here, just for that purpose, because I think that there are structures
Uchi Valley
out there.
Church.
Well, a
There's
good
a lot
place
of
to start
places
is
out
the
there.
inventory, at least knowing what you got. And
Yeah.
You got Glendale, you got Darlington schools, you know, right now
Well,
the
there's
communities.
there's a bunch of them out there,
Yeah.
but I think we need to know what they are. And there should be something that allows the county to inventory those things and start investigating how we can.
Well, you could put a policy that says we'll pursue grant funding for inventory of historic structures. And that,
preservation.
I mean, theoretically, how this is supposed to work is that is the board's policy. So as staff, we know that it's okay to start looking into these grants.
How would we do something from our standpoint to make a recommendation to the county commissioners to adopt that? How would we, Mac?
Well, the first thing I think tonight, we can make sure that we've got authorizing language, so that's an activity that we can pursue, that's supported in the comprehensive plan, and then a recommendation to the county commission to
Okay.
consider some funding.
Whatever motion we come out with, I would like that included in.
Okay.
I would like to make sure that it's understood that's countywide too, so that
Absolutely.
the Darlington and the Glendale and the Uchi Valley Church and they're really, we need
Those
to do all we
communities,
can.
those communities struggle to take care of those places.
And those are, a lot of those are wooden, and if they don't get some attention pretty quick, they're gonna fall in.
Anyway, that's just probably off topic a little bit, but.
No.
I think that's right on topic.
That's right, we need to raise some money.
Yeah, that's the hard part about the historic structures is once you identify how you get to pay the, Pensacola has been going through a big,
But the more you
Yeah.
put in, correct me if I'm wrong, the more you put into this process, the harder the language is, then the easier, or the not easier, but the more apt you are to get grant funded. Because now the
That's
Puny
right.
Act is, I mean, they've been on that case for a long time, and it's starting to pay off a little bit.
You know, it sounds crazy, but, you know, didn't we just receive a bunch of money from the BP oil spill that the
Yes,
county
we
trying to
did.
figure out what they want to do? Why can't they allocate some of that money to do this research y'all talking about need to be done?
Well, Mr. Anderson, we're limited in what we can use those funds
Well,
for.
that's why I'm asking, so you limited for
Yeah.
how the fund can be.
Most of the
I think
BP
what
funds.
I think what we're talking about here is the first step in going down that road. And I think it has to be a serious step made, a serious effort made to to catch up.
That's why option one sort of, I'm not real crazy about it. It's specific. I want it to be countywide.
Okay.
On option one, could we not just put in there Walton County,
A countywide effort,
countywide?
preservation effort. Mac, is that?
Or Kristen, I guess their comments, would that be more towards option two?
I think what I heard was we want a policy that we would inventory structures, in
And
the
encourage
comprehensive plan.
preservation.
And then your next step beyond that, once you found out what you had, would be to determine what preservation measures you would wanna have in a code. And that's where it gets really dicey, I'll be honest with you, because there's hardly ever funding, and then it becomes on the property owner or whoever
Well,
owns it.
We will be very careful because, well, I would, who owns the Darlington Church, whatever, you know? I mean,
The county owns Darlington and Glendale.
yeah, they own Mossy Head School too, I think.
Yeah, they own Mossy Head
Well,
School.
see, if we knew that, then that would help us know, I mean, that's really your first step is what do you have and who
Well,
owns
so I
it?
think that's what we
Yeah.
wanna make sure, I wanna make sure is in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is a step
The first step.
to get where we need to go.
Yeah, well, let's make the first step, get where we need to
Yeah,
go,
let's
get pointed in
get
the
there.
right direction.
And do it countywide.
Countywide.
Cannot emphasize countywide.
Amen.
Somebody be forgotten, Mossy Head.
Yeah.
Glendale, but me and you.
We ain't got no commissioner now.
And this way you went to school, wasn't it, Glendale, Montana, that's old school.
Well, Daddy went to school, Mossy Head.
I had very much.
Anyway, that's what do we need to do here.
Just need a motion on that and then a motion on the whole element and we're done.
I'll make,
So I guess, just if,
Go ahead.
like a suggestion, so, I guess direct staff to draft draft policy language for a countywide inventory of historical structures.
that sounds like a really
That's the
good.
first step.
That's the first step.
Is that all right with you? That's
Kristen,
all
does that satisfy the statutory requirements for the?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And with the other stuff that we're doing too, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, okay, let's get past that. So we need a motion for that.
Yes, sir.
I make the motion that we read that again.
Yeah. So, draft, policy language for countywide inventory of historical structures.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now, the next step in that process, I guess, would be the land development code, right?
I would recommend waiting to see what we come up with in our study. That is a significant, if you decide you want to mandate preservation of these structures, that's something we really have to think about, in terms of funding, and, how much the property owner would be responsible for that. You get into situations like where the structure is so dilapidated that the preservation is, millions, restoration.
These places aren't that big.
Yeah,
And they're mostly
okay.
county.
Okay.
I mean, and
It's not that I'm all for it. It's a great idea. I've been reading about Pensacola's nightmare.
First of all, we're not a body that
Yeah,
can
right.
do anything.
Well,
We're simply making recommendations to the county
yes,
commission.
yes, right.
Okay, and what I want to make clear to them is that we want to make sure that we look at all of Walton County historical structures and do all that Walton County can do to preserve those structures.
Okay.
And not just isolated areas in Walton.
Right,
Yeah.
all of Walton County.
And we want
That's right.
that preservation stuff's serious. We want to preserve, and the county owns a lot of those buildings.
Okay. Well, yeah, that makes things easier.
That's all I got. Anything else? Are we done?
The whole
We
element.
need to adopt the language for the whole element.
Yes.
Need a motion.
What was the whole element again?
We have a motion.
Housing.
I second.
We have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, excellent.
Thank you very much.
Are we done?
Is that it? We stand adjourned.
Man, y'all did a great job.
Y'all did a fantastic job.